Hello and welcome back to another devlog for Ash's Quest. Last time we did a brief overview of my plans for the project, but today we'll be going more in depth and look at actual mechanics powering the game. Now there's a lot of moving gears when it comes to game design, but two things that are necessary in all the simplest of games are an environment for a game to take place in, and a way of displaying that environment to the player. Traditionally, the world of roguelikes consists of multiple dungeon floors, usually randomly generated. A common way of constructing these floors is by using a 2D grid of tiles, which is the direction powder went due to the standards set by the games it is based off of. Now, you'd think that with modern advances in technology and moves to 3D engines, there'd be different ways of doing things. But in the 43 years since the original Rogue came out, tile maps have still proven themselves to be the most effective way of constructing levels, besides maybe some Doom shenanigans, but I'll save that for another project. I've written a few tile-based game engines over the years, and I found that the best approach is to use an array of numeric tile IDs. Like the name suggests, these tile IDs just tell the game what material exists at what location. For Ash's Quest, I opted to use a 2D tile map stored as a 1D 8-byte array. The default size for dungeons is 32 by 32 tiles, but I've included the option to change these dimensions between floors if necessary. For anyone curious about why I'm not using a 2D array, it's generally just faster and easier to read and write data into 1D arrays, and you can just index the array by feeding the world coordinates through this equation for 2D tile maps and this equation for 3D tile maps, although we won't be using the latter in this project. Now we need a getter and setter function for the tile data, which uses the equations I just mentioned to interact with the tile array. For the tiles themselves, right now we only need to give them a few attributes. A tile ID, which provides a simple way to reference them internally, and a boolean for whether the tile is a solid wall or not. We'll also need an array to store the tiles, which allows us to check the attributes of the tiles making up the world using only the ID. And with that, we've got the building blocks for our roguelike dungeon. In the roguelike genre, there's a ton of ways to generate dungeons. In Powder, there was 6 specific themes that are generated at different points in the game. Roguelike Dungeons, which was a series of rooms connected by winding corridors like the original Rogue Dungeon Generator. Qix levels, which were sprawling hallways dotted with small alcoves the player could use to hide from enemies. Mazes, which were sprawling mazes of varying width leading to the first boss, the Kraken Minotaur. The caves, which swapped the claustrophobic feel of tight corridors with open areas that left the player exposed to attack on all sides. The Metal Cave, a secret floor that housed the second boss. And Hello, which is a cavern of fire and water housing the final boss, Baezl'bub. I'm also not censoring myself for that name. The method for generating the last level is actually called Build Hello in the source code. Here it is if you don't believe me. For Ash's Quest, we'll be incorporating the first 4 generators into our engine, but I'll also be throwing in another generator that's a pretty big departure from the normal ones you'll see. First, we need to write a class for the rooms, which contains the dimensions, world coordinates, and rotation of the room. With that done, in our roguelike generator, we start by generating as many of these rooms as we can in the current map. This is done by picking a random spot for the room, random dimensions for the room, and checking to see if it intersects with map edges or any existing rooms. With this method, we try to keep placing rooms until we either create 20 rooms or fail 40 times to place a room. So far, so good. But now we need doors and a path between each room so I can progress through the dungeon. In order to do so, we cycle through the list of generated rooms. For each entry in the list, we randomly pick a room from the previously covered entries and connect it to our current room. For instance, room 1 will always be connected to room 2, but both rooms 1 and 2 have a 50-50 chance of being connected to room 3, a 1 in 3 chance of connecting to room 4, and so on. For the corridors themselves, we pick random start and end points along the walls of the connected rooms, place doors at those points, and carve a walkable path from point A to point B. As sanity checker, we allow the game 40 failed attempts at connecting the rooms. Once it hits 40 failed attempts, we deem the current layout sucks and try again from the beginning. If all goes well, however, we can move on to placing the up and down stairways by picking random coordinates for each stairway, making sure those coordinates are on solid ground inside a room and place them. And honestly, this system's pretty solid. Several games such as Pokemon Mystery Dungeon and the original Rogue use it exclusively for dungeon generation. But as I mentioned before, we've got some more generators to work on. Now there's a few ways to generate caves. Cellular automata, which averages out random noise patterns to create realistically shaped terrain. Perlin or simplex noise, which uses gradient patterns to generate smoother and more uniformly shaped caves. Random or drunk walk, which randomly meanders around the map to create much more chaotic and disorderly caves. Now, each of these methods work pretty well, and the cool thing is you can use them in conjunction with each other to add more depth to the world you're building. In Powder, the random walk method was used, likely due to technical limitations of the GBA, as well as the habit of these other generators creating multiple, inaccessible pockets of dungeon space. For the cave chapter, we're going to be using the random walk, since by its nature it ensures that there is an open and traversal path between the stairways. Starting off, I'm putting an option for this generator to generate lakes in the cave. This means that the first walker cleave a trail of water tiles instead of starting off with the cavern floor. I'm also adding a tracker for the number of stone tiles we've removed from the map. We want to make sure that we stop digging once we remove about half of the map. Now the logic for the walkers themselves is very simple. For the first walker, pick a random starting point on the map that's 3 or more tiles away from the edge. Then, we pick a random direction that the walker is facing. Each walker has a total lifespan of 300 steps they're allowed to take through the dungeon before we move on to the next walker. While they're alive, however, they operate with the following constraints to each step. If you're currently on an unnatural tile, you die. This prevents the walker from breaking any structures it placed before starting terrain gen. If your current tile is a stone wall, set it to a stone floor and report that you've dug up another tile. Move forward 1 tile so long as doing so won't bring you to the edge of the map. Roll or die. You have a 60% chance of changing your direction by turning either left or right. This continues until the walker has filled up half the map with water and floor tiles, leaving us with a nice and natural looking cave system that we could drop our staircases into without needing to check for an open path to walk or swim through. So there's a lot of really solid ways to generate mazes. However, again, due to limitations of the GVA, Powder opted to go with a relatively simple approach. Pick a number between 1 and 4. This is the width of our maze corridors. Flood the level with stone bricks. Excavate cells on the map, the dimensions equal to the corridor width, leaving a 1 tile gap between each cell. Initialize a cutout array with a size half that the level dimensions, and fill it with all the index locations of the map corridors. That is to say, the possible locations where the walkable tiles will be placed. Initialize the cell array with a size quarter that of the level dimensions, and just fill that with the numbers 0 through 255. This array just tracks connected sets from the above cutout list using the union fill algorithm. Now we need to shuffle the contents of our cutout array, which can be done by running through the array and swapping each entry with another entry at a random location. By the nature of this approach, most entries are going to be moved around at least twice, so the end result will be an adequately randomized array once we finish going through it. Now we apply the cuts that don't join existing pairs, which creates winding corridors of our maze. This is done by finding what cell a given cut belongs to, checking to see if the next cut belongs to it, and connecting them if they belong to different cells. And if that were done, just plop down as a pair of staircases and you're good to go. It's not the most intricate or complicated generator, but it gets the job done and sets the groundwork for the next system. The Qix Generator is unique among roguelike generators in that the logic behind it comes not from the roguelike or RPG genres, but from the arcade puzzle genre. Now, if you haven't played Qix, a TLDR is you control a marker that travels around the border of the play area. Your goal is to claim territory in the play area by drawing lines across the screen with the marker. Once the marker is successfully drawn in a closed cell, the path it travels is filled in and it becomes a part of the border. If you grew up during the early 2000s like me, you may recognize this gameplay from Web of Vernax from Neopets. But you're probably wondering, Bree, how is this relevant to roguelikes? Look at the massive cells. Now imagine if we poke holes in the border between the cells, allowing you to move between them. It looks more like a map now, doesn't it? Now the question is, how do we build it? Short answer is this. First, we start by running the Qix Generator to create a rough layout at the level. Then, we run a single smoothing pass using a cellular automata function. This creates the rough guide for our Qix Generator. From here, we run through the tile map and replace the cave floor and wall tiles with their room variants. We're going to save a bit of time here and just use one loop that directly reads the array we're storing tiles in, instead of accessing it remotely using the get tile function. Once that's done, we'll pick a random number for the amount of walls we're drawing. Somewhere between 17 and 28 will work for the default floor size. Now, we're going to enter a loop counting down from that number, giving ourselves 100 attempts to successfully place each wall. This ensures we don't catch ourselves in an infinite loop if the next part doesn't pan out. Inside this attempt loop, we need to find a random floor tile that is surrounded by floor tiles on each side. This is where we start building the wall. If we can't find a spot after 100 ties, break out of the loop and try again. From this floor tile, we pick two random directions, placing wall tiles until we hit a solid wall. Once you've successfully drawn each wall, we're going to build a cutout array similar to what we did with the maze generator. Going through each tile that isn't touching the map edge, we check for the following. Is it a wall tile where only two solid neighbors are parallel to one another? If so, add that position to the cutout array. Next, we build the cell array. Unlike with the maze generator though, this cell array is the same size as the tile array in our map class. If the map is 32 by 32 tiles, there's going to be 1024 cells initialized. Now we need to go through the cell array and group together all the floor tiles in low that are in direct contact with each other, and shuffle them in our cutout array. Again, this is using the union fill algorithm. Running through the array, we are now searching for spots to place our doors. These spots must be a wall tile with exactly two solid neighbors that are parallel to each other. Again, these spots must be a wall tile with two solid neighbors in parallel. If the tile matches the above criteria, check if the neighboring floor tile belongs to a separate group and place a door there if they are. Finally, we do another pass through the dungeon floor to clean up the walls and any orphaned rooms. And the Qix dungeon is complete. Add some loops to place the stairwells, and that's the fourth generator down. Now, unlike the previous generators, this one comes not from Powder, but from one of its inspirations, Dungeon Crawl Soup Store, or Crawl for short. And before I want to go into this algorithm, I just want to give credit to the Crawl development community, most specifically Vificient and Infiniplex for designing and programming the original algorithm. The Labyrinth is a dungeon constructed out of concentric octagonal corridors, each connected by a series of hallways. Unlike previous levels where the location of the stairway is completely arbitrary, the labyrinth requires players to travel from the outermost layer towards the central core. To increase the navigational difficulty, we randomize the dungeon like so. The number of octagons in the labyrinth is randomized. The octagons are broken up into different sectors. The further out the octagon is, the more sectors there will be. Hallways are randomly placed between the octagons, ensuring that a path inward isn't always a path forward. Now, to give a more detailed explanation of how this system works, it's going to require a lot more explaining and a lot more coding than basically all these other methods. As such, I'm going to be branching this generator into its own video, where I'll be showing exactly how to implement it from scratch in a more tutorial-oriented setting. Furthermore, since Crawl has some really amazing world gen, I'll be branching out and working on a more tutorial-oriented series that goes alongside these devlogs, because all of this is generated randomly. There's a lot of cool systems in this game that I want to talk about, but a lot of them go beyond the scope that I want to discuss within the main devlogs. And that's it for today's video. In the next part, I'll be going over the evolution of the dungeon renderer. If you like what you saw, consider liking and subscribing. And as always, if you're feeling generous, consider supporting my GoFundMe, as all money there goes towards my cancer treatment. And with all that said, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you again very soon.